nice little presentation and discussion panel afterward on Assassin's Creed Odyssey and how it kind of ties back into history and how it represents historical figures and such.
If you're not, then you lucked out.
Exactly. Otherwise, you probably should be somewhere else, and you're here now, and we're not going to let you leave.
Doors are locked.
So this is kind of who's all up here. So my name is Laurens van Beek. I am the treasurer for EPX, and my background is kind of in computer science and art history. And I'll let everyone else introduce themselves.
Okay. Yes. By that order, I'm Rosemary Moore. I have a joint appointment in classics and history. Yeah, and I played some video games. So.
My name is Jillian Herron. I am the president of EPX Studio, and I'm an English and creative writing major. And just for clarification, EPX Studio is a student org on campus. We make video games, so that's why we're here.
It's a qualification.
Yeah.
I'm Alec. I'm the vice president of EPX, and I'm in the master's in computer science program.
Cool. So kind of the order is we'll go over a little bit of a presentation on historical figures in the game itself and kind of how they are represented. Then we'll kind of go over what it actually goes into, how these games are made, especially in small indie companies such as Ubisoft.
There are only 400 people there. That's kind of cool.
And then we'll actually pull up the game itself and play a little bit of it and go through a little bit of what the Acropolis looks like and kind of how that ties back into what it actually should look like in history. So,
all right. So thanks. So yeah, I studied classics. I study ancient history. My particular specialty is Roman history, but I teach really all periods. And one of my areas of research is ancient warfare. So, you know, I have a lot that I can bring to bear when I'm playing a game like this. And I think that in a lot of ways it really increases my appreciation of what Ubisoft is doing with this. You know, that said, it's what I study is history, which have very different sources, and this is a game that's meant to be entertainment as well as, you know. So what I think I should say from the start is that I really enjoy this game. I enjoy a lot of how the classical world is presented in all kinds of media, you know, movies and TV shows, historical novels, and games like this. That said, you know, the sorts of topics that I study, it's inevitable that the way they're portrayed is going to be portrayed kind of differently in a game like this for, you know, what I think are really good reasons. And Alec and Jillian, I think, are probably going to expand on that, but I'm going to talk about this from more of a historical and Greek cultural point of view. So one of the things that I have to think about first is that this is really meant to be fun. And, you know, aspects of this game structure being an open world game means that some important parts of history are going to be really hard to fit in. And by that, I mean specifically something like chronology. And, you know, an open world game like this means that you can go practically any place at any time. And even though this game is set in the Peloponnesian War, what I do see is a lot of telescoping of events, telescoping of figures, so that, you know, you can see the people you might have been hoping to see, but maybe in a different order, or maybe with not the same sort of attention to this happened in this year, this happened in that year, that somebody like me might be looking for in a text or in a paper or a book. So other things too, if you had too much of the history of the Peloponnesian War in the game, not only might it not be that much fun, but I think that it could be, you know, really kind of a turnoff to a lot of potential players, because I think that a lot of people have expectations in a long-running game series like Assassin's Creed, and they might think, well, you know, I really don't know that much about Greek culture. I don't know much about this period. Am I going to get the story? Am I going to understand it? And so, you know, some historical elements are there, but they're translated in a way that I would not probably talk about in class, and that's fine. And so what I think that comes into is something that came up when we did sort of an earlier version of this panel at the EPX Studio's IndieCon a few weeks ago. And something that came up in the discussion is that there's a difference between accuracy and authenticity. And I really thought about that and came to appreciate that, because, you know, what people want is the feel of this different culture, the feeling that they want to be in it, and they know something about people's daily lives and important figures, but they're not going to be hindered by their lack of knowledge of history. And I think that that's fine, actually. I think that it's actually, if you want to go further, you have a lot of areas to explore. And it's kind of funny, I was just playing last night, and you know, in this game you play a mercenary, and I'm going to talk about mercenaries in a second. You can either choose to play as a male named Alexios or his sister Cassandra. And so I'm playing Cassandra because, being a woman, I like that opportunity to play a woman. And she is at the sanctuary of Asclepius, who is a healer god, the son of Apollo. And his major sanctuary was at a place in Greece called Epidaurus. And so she's doing a quest where she's got to get this information about her mother and what happened when Alexios was a baby from one of the priests of Asclepius. And he's an older guy, and he's like, you know, a lot of these kind of guys. Oh, do you want, let me tell you all about how we got here, right? Year by year. And Cassandra is just kind of like, wait, I don't need the history, I just need the details. And to me, I thought that was a really good metaphor for understanding some of what the game developers, I think, were trying to do when they took Greek culture and history and put it into this game. And so what I'm going to talk about now is, you know, what players want versus what ancient Greek culture actually kind of generally did, and use that as a way to talk about a couple of specific things. You know, first, I just mentioned that you had the opportunity to play as a woman, and a woman who is not just this generally stereotypical, objectified, beautiful woman with chainmail bra and that sort of thing. She's wearing armor that looks more or less functional. She's clearly very athletic, muscular, and so forth. And I'm like, yeah, I can get into playing somebody like that. I identify with this person. That said, you know, ancient Greece doesn't have much of a place for women in warfare, even Spartan women, right? The game has a lot of just sort of tooltips that they show during loading screens, and they're like, you know, in general, women weren't present in Greek warfare except for like these two absolute exceptions, Artemisia and somebody else. It's like, yeah, well, okay, and you know, what are they trying to justify here? That aside, you know, as a historian, I'm kind of like, yeah, that probably wouldn't happen, but on the other hand, it's like, this is great. And I love being able to play this character, you know, and she tells it like it is, too. She is not shy. She stands up for herself. So, also in terms of history, and this game genre, this is basically like a variation of an action RPG, role-playing game. And what RPGs tend to mean, they'll can tell you a lot more about this, by the way, is that you have a character that you develop, like in Dungeons and Dragons, and you level up, and as you level up, all of your abilities, well, not all, but ones you choose, magically improve. And what does that mean? It means that if you just continue to level up, the game can get kind of boring, right? And so if you look on the map in the world, these different regions of the world are separated by levels. And so, you know, when you start, you're in this little kind of podunk island called Kefalonia. If you go over to Boeotia, oh my goodness, you better run because everybody has a bright red skull over their head, and you're only like level 5 or something. So you run over to Fokis, where, you know, you're likely to not die every few seconds. And so that's another change too, but that's okay because that's generally what we expect if you play these games. I mean, that's like, okay, fine. And so, like, the realism of it, there's a limit to it. There's a limit to the realism as well, in that I can just walk around everywhere in armor that actually is probably pretty uncomfortable and weighs a lot. I can carry one weapon for a while. No, now I can carry 2, and oh yeah, I have a bow, and I can carry 60 arrows, and then 30 explosive arrows, 30 fire arrows, and that sort of thing.
And you can go swimming.
And you can go swimming, right?
Yeah, gear.
Perfect. So, you know, I'd like to hear what they have to say about these sorts of game-governed expectations, because it really is a world with overlaps, but it's not really history. And again, that's fine. So what I want to talk about now is the Mistyus, and that's coming up. Oh yeah, I can change it like this. This is Cassandra, right? Don't you want to play her? Yeah, you know, my 8-year-old son comes and watches me play too. I think he likes her too. And that is Icarus, your eagle. And if you played other Assassin's Creed games, yeah. if you played other Assassin's Creed games, you understand why there's got to be an eagle in this, right? All right, so Mistyus. Every 5 seconds is like, hey, Mistyus, come solve this problem for me. That's how you get going in this world. So I thought, well, let's just start about the history here. And so what does this do functionally? It allows you to do just sort of action RPG-like things in a historical setting with some sort of connection to that reality, right? So what are they really? Well, being a classicist and an ancient historian, one of the skills that is really emphasized in graduate school is knowing words and knowing how words are used, right? And so I was like, oh, Mistyus, I think I know what that probably means, but I don't think I've seen it much before. So I look it up in the various resources that we have to check that, and Mistyus is a word, but it's not really used to mean mercenary. A couple of other words are used, and guess what? They're usually used in the plural, and that's because mercenaries in the Greek world in this period tend to be heavy infantry, right? And heavy infantry in the Greek world, if you've played any civilization games, you know what I'm talking about. They have heavy armor, they have a big round shield, which only covers half of your body, which means that half of it sticks out on the other half. So good for solo combat, right? You have a spear that's generally used for thrusting and a sword. That's not much good on its own, right? It needs its own. People who are armed like that are meant to fight together in a unit, you know. So there's one disjuncture, but it has this great game function. And guess what? Women generally aren't mercenaries because women aren't meant to do that in the Greek world. It is really not a role that they could ever play unless they're absolutely exceptional. Something I do like about this role is that mercenaries really were a phenomenon that increased because of the Peloponnesian War, right? The Greek world in general is not a very rich world. The land's not good. A lot of people moved away at various points. And, you know, from the 6th century BC, we know that there are mercenaries who might go down to fight in, like, Egypt. We have a very famous graffito of a mercenary who said, here I am, carving my name in Ramses II plague, and by the way, here's my friend, my axe, haha. So why are there more mercenaries at this point in history? Well, the Peloponnesian War is a really factionalized war. You either sided with the Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta, or the Delian League, headed by Athens. And as the war proceeds, it is very hard for different communities not to take a side. And so what does that mean for these city-states? There are factions supporting Athens or Sparta struggling for control. And if you pick the wrong side, it's very possible that you might be exiled or might be leaving that city-state to avoid exile. You leave your property behind, you might leave your family behind, and unless you're restored by some decree or law, there's no going back. And so the people of the class who would fight in the military in the first place, by the way, it's a privilege. You had to have minimum amount of property. They also, by the way, had to buy their own arms and weapons. Well, that is a transferable skill, so to speak. And because war is something that drains a lot of resources, they can hire themselves out. Because Athens needs men, Sparta needs men. That said, that's a little different. Again, it's usually in the plural. It's not like, you know, they're the Lone Ranger or, you know, a Ronin, some random Ronin running around, let me solve your problems. That said, it's still a convenient vehicle, and, you know, it really makes the game a lot of fun. They're stateless people and they're low status people. You know, I don't think that anybody Cassandra herself would not think of herself as anybody wealthy, so I think that intersects too. But that just is kind of a difference between the historical circumstances and the way that's transferred into really what I think is a pretty viable game mechanism. The other thing I wanted to talk about, there's a ton to talk about with this, right? And I'm going to turn it over in just a couple of minutes to these people who really know games. But first I want to talk about Brasidas, right? How many people have gotten to that part of the game? Yeah, Miles, right, in the back? All right, I got there a few nights ago. I was like, okay, first I'm going to talk about, he's a real person. And if you want to pick heroes of the early part of the Peloponnesian War, you would pick him, definitely. That said, too, I also want to talk about modern understanding of Sparta. And does anybody think he bears a passing resemblance to Leonidas in 300? Yeah. Of course, a lot of Greek guys had big beards, too, so keep that in mind. So what I'm going to do is show a little bit of this and kind of comment on both aspects of it. So Brasidas was a Spartan general. He is not only a really smart, innovative thinker, and that's not something that people associate with the Spartans, by the way. Spartans are like, this is how we've always done it. Strategic innovation for the first part of this war is not their thing. He's also a charismatic person, very persuasive, and a very brave warrior. You know, he leads from the front, literally, in the battlefield. So let's take a look at what he does. Oh, what I should do, so what we have here is Cassandra, of course, right? And she has to fight these thugs in a Corinthian warehouse. And gee, it looks like there's a lot of them there. Of course, that's never really a problem for a properly leveled player character. But the fight looks a little intimidating, and lo and behold, yeah, man. And so what's he doing with that spear? He's doing like Leonidas in 300. He just throws it into his breastpiece and pulls it out. All right, and here let's stop again. So, do y'all see what he said? Come and get it, right? So when I heard this, and I know that the classics folks in here get this too, right, Kenneth? This is a translation of a Greek phrase, molon labe, right? Come and get it, literally. Who says this originally? Leonidas, during the standoff at Thermopylae. Plutarch, the Greek writer, has this in his collected sayings of Spartans. Xerxes, the king of Persia, writes to Leonidas to make him a diplomatic offer. Basically, lay down your arms. And Leonidas writes back 2 words, very Spartan, right? hit him in a few words, come and get him. So, you know, here we have another sort of callback to this movie. And, you know, at the same time, something I really like about this, let's just kind of watch this because I really enjoyed watching this. Yeah, I mean, there we go, more 300 action. And that's how she, I mean, it's a very satisfying game to play, right? And here you are with this guy who's got the looks, the words, and the moves of the guy that we just watched in 300. And also happened to be a real-life Spartan general who captured a very important strategic city from Athens. If you know the history of the Peloponnesian War, Brasidas actually fought against Thucydides, the historian, and caught him by surprise, caused Thucydides to have to go into exile. And at another battle of at Amphipolis, Brasidas and Cleon, whom you see, the famous Athenian demagogue, both happened to die in battle. And I know that that might come up in the game. Right?
Can I confirm or deny?
Right. So, lots more to talk about. And I think I'm going to do it over that way. All right, so thanks a lot. Who's next? What would you like me to? Oh, wait, you got it.
That works too.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. How are games made? The ultimate question. Usually in teams. So any kind of game, as long, you know, it's significantly more normal for a game to be made with groups of people who are specialized in particular areas. That's how EPX Studio runs. That's how a lot of industry studios in the industry run. So typically you have the game designers, the content writers, the composers, the programmers, and even like when it comes to art, like you have like multiple levels of art, right? Just like you would have multiple levels of sound and different people, different programmers programming different aspects of the game. Yes, and then you have the team leader, which reports back to the producer, and that reports back to the company. So it's essentially, how do you keep the game coherent and cohesive when you're working with your small company of 100 people? Yes.
And then there are more teams within that. It's
Yeah.
teams all the way down. You have your specialized roles, and then within those roles you have someone who's just focused on one character, or a group of people who are focused on exclusively one character or one location or things like that. Everything boils down into very, very specialized roles. So like, who is Brasidas or Pericles, and what are all the outfits? Everyone has to make a bunch of different outfits that have to fit on multiple different characters. So now all of the character models have to fit this kind of base standard so that they can wear all of the different clothes. And non-player characters have to be generated so that you don't be like, oh, I've seen that person wandering around 3 different cities already. What's he doing? So you have to be able to kind of construct new random passersby on the fly. All of these art assets are done by, again, very specialized teams kind of working together to, under the creative direction of producers and content creators, to kind of make sure that the game still feels like it's a unified experience, even though really it's a whole lot of individual people all trying to collaborate and smoosh their products together and hope that it turns out looking like, you know, something good. And we have a little behind the scenes video talking about the people at Ubisoft and what that process is like.
The work that we're doing on Assassin's Creed Odyssey really builds on top of what we did on Syndicate. All the team knows they can build a great game, and we're using that energy to build an experience that's even greater, and probably what's going to be remembered as the best Assassin's Creed ever made.
Odyssey isn't just the title of the game. It's also the adventure that we started together over 3 years ago.
Can everybody hear that?
400 developers in Ubisoft Quebec City, plus another 400 developers across the world working together.
When we started talking about what we wanted to do with our next Assassin's Creed, ancient Greece became one of those places that was really interesting to us.
We had the chance to go and do research trips. It allowed us to have a few key touchstones that when we were building the game and discussing the game together, we could use.
All of these amazing historical characters, we finally got to take a chance and meet them.
One of the things that Assassin's Creed Odyssey allows us to do is through player choice, which is so important.
How players play that, how they choose to be a nice guy, be a bad guy, lie, cheat, what are you going to do in this historical background?
In Ubisoft Quebec City, because all the different disciplines are here, we really get the chance to work together.
Because it is smaller and because it's always wanted to prove itself, you get a lot of people with amazing personalities and this drive that you sometimes don't see everywhere else.
We're not as kind of divided up on different floors. We have a much more open working environment, and I do think the physical space that you work in has a big effect on how you work, what decisions you make, creatively what you do.
There's some sort of a family atmosphere when you're looking at the collaboration that you have with other studios.
Bring different cultures together, bring different studios across the world to work together collaboratively to achieve the best we could possibly make.
I really like the title. I think it really describes not only the experience the players are going to have in the game, but also the experience we've had kind of making the game as well.
It's an adventure for players to explore for 100 hours. What I really want them to come out with is that it does feel like an Odyssey for them.
You'll see us innovating in this game more than we've ever done before, with the dialogue, the ability to play as either Alexios or Cassandra, having special abilities. All that stuff combined together really transforms the Assassin's Creed experience.
Over the next few years, we're going to continue to deliver awesome experiences and entertain millions of people across the world.
So yeah, Ubisoft Quebec is the small studio. I think it's got like 400 people. That's compared to some of the other titles which have had upwards of like 2,000 people all working on one game, which is an absolutely ludicrous undertaking.
I can barely do a group of like 8.
Yeah.
So yeah, this game is, it really is well put together. And now I'm speaking for a member of the panel who had helped to organize this, Professor Deb Trusty, who's in classics. She had a family emergency, and so I am standing in for her. So keep in mind that I'm a historian and not an archaeologist. That said, I can tell you some things about the Acropolis as well as add some historical context. And what Laurens is going to do is going to be live streaming through a browser in this game. So we're going to, I think you mentioned you're going to start probably as Icarus?
So yeah, so when I load in here, I'll be sitting on top of Athena, and I can switch to Icaros and fly around the whole planet. These are the lovely tooltips.
So they really did pay a lot of attention to the visuals in the game. I think they're really beautiful, and something that I really liked about the previous game, Assassin's Creed Origins, as well as this, is that it really feels like the places they're set in. They're really good at having a sense of place here. Egypt looks a lot different from a lot of these cities in Greece. So here, right now, what we're doing is flying over the Parthenon, which is a religious and political center of Athens. It's a raised part of the city in the Mycenaean period, which is roughly 800 years prior to this point. This is probably where the king of Athens had a palace. At this point, of course, Athens is run by a democracy. And so what Laurens is having Icaros fly around now is the Parthenon, which would have just been finished at the time this game is set. Construction on it began in 449 BC. It completed in 432. And something to know is that the Parthenon, as well as several other buildings on the Acropolis, are just really, really tightly connected with Athenian democracy and its leading politician, Pericles, whom you actually meet in the game. Why was it built? It was built to replace the previous Parthenon, which was destroyed during the Persian Wars. Athenians had to abandon their city. The Persians took control and basically trashed a lot of the Acropolis. And so Pericles instituted a long-term building program which was really designed to show the glory of Athens and celebrate its recent victories in war. What else can we see here? So let's see.
Here you can see that they're actually still doing construction work on some of the buildings.
So they're actually doing construction. That's a really nice touch, I think. Again, this is sort of like First Avenue of Coral. Let's see, maybe we could get towards the, there we go. Is that the, yeah, that's the synchronization point. So the point where you synchronize, these are fast travel points and give you these wonderful vistas of the city. This gigantic statue here is probably about 44 feet high, is Athena Promachos, right? Meaning this is Athena who stands before her army and leads them to victory. And that is certainly very suitable for the city of Athens, where the patron goddess is Athena. Behind that and a little bit to the right, of course, you have these nice piles of flower petals and stuff to jump into.
That totally works in real life.
So here we are going to, I believe, the Parthenon, right?
This is away from the Parthenon.
Away from the Parthenon, okay, yeah. Lots of colors, right? Is this in the Propylaea?
Yes.
Yeah, so what we have here is the Propylaea, which is another very large structure. It is replacing a previous sort of gateway to this Acropolis that, again, was destroyed during the Persians. It was never completed. You can see that with some scaffolds, I believe. It's well known for, so what we have here that she's running by, right behind this is, like right there, is the, right there is the Temple of Athena Nike, or Athena Victory. This was begun construction in about 449 and completed in 420. A lot of what you see here really, I think, is very carefully done. Something that people might not associate with ancient Greece is really how colorful it was. But it's very clear, and we've known this for a long time. Yeah, raise your level, right? I'm at the level where you don't have any damage at all from falling, even on something like that.
That was nice.
Yeah. So talking about a player fantasy, right? No damage at all while following. Let me see. So here we're going actually into the Parthenon. And something that Deb mentioned is that actually the Parthenon depicted here is backwards. So how are temples built? How is this temple built? Well, typically a temple is this sort of rectangular structure, and in the front is something called a pronaos, which is basically kind of a colonnaded porch. In the middle is something called the cella, and this is where the image of Athena Parthenos would have been. This is also sculpted by Phidias. And in the back is something called the opisthodemos, which is Greek for just the house in the back. Right? It's where a lot of the treasure would have been kept, and something we talked about in the previous version of this panel is maybe some reasons why Ubisoft might have placed it that way.
Yeah, so Assassin's Creed is, I believe, motivated by two things, money and killing. Those are the fun things to do. So,
isn't that just real life, though?
I mean, you're right. So it would make sense if you were trying to lead a character as a game designer to something that maybe they don't think is super interesting, is to line it with gold before you do that. So we were discussing previously how putting the treasury or just general treasure in the front of the Parthenon actually made a lot of sense if you wanted them to come and see the statue of Zeus. Personally, I would have been fine to see the statue of Zeus, but it makes a lot of sense that that's how you would lead a player without, you know, programming in a giant neon arrow telling them where to go.
Little goodies, because it's hard to believe with all the care that they've put in that they wouldn't have known that. So a deliberate choice makes sense. I haven't looked at the developers' diaries. So this is probably the most famous statue of Athena. This is Athena Parthenos, Athena the unmarried young woman. And so this was really an amazing work. Not only is it an amazing work of art, part of what's amazing about this has to do with the materials it's made from. It's referred to as it's referred to as a...
So you know it's live.
Yeah. Chris Elephantine statue, which means it's made of gold and ivory. And so what you see there isn't marble, it's actually ivory. And the gown and the figure of the owl, which by the way is used as the sort of emblem for all the Athenian banners, that's made out of gold. Thucydides, the historian, talks about some of the reasons why this might have been made of this material. You know, in part it's to reflect the wealth of Athens, but Thucydides also says specifically, in the case of emergency, this is something that, like as a last resort, it could be used to actually pay for goods, because this economy is not at all a credit-based economy. You have to have the goods to pay for it. And by the way, you know, these sorts of temples were, well, calling it a temple is actually kind of controversial. It might have simply been sort of a symbol of Athens as a place. But temples in general, and I'll just sort of include it in that category, were places where stores of treasures were held. Communities might use them for that purpose. A place like the Sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi, which drew Greeks from all over the Greek-speaking world, had a lot of very, very valuable dedications made to Apollo there, which would have been stored, both as a source of wealth for the priests of that temple, but also as sort of a tourist attraction. And so something like this had a ritual function, but it also had a function of, you know, people visiting to come see. It's meant to be looked at, right? I don't know, what else can we say about this? There's stuff that is, you know, maybe not 100% correct, but I think Deb on the whole was pretty impressed by it, and, you know, I am too. I think this is a really lovely game to just kind of take in. Do y'all know if they have a plan for like an exploration mode for this game, like they did for Assassin's Creed Origins?
I don't know if they do.
I thought they did, but don't quote me on that.
Okay.
But yeah.
So some things that maybe aren't like really consistent with the ancient world. These statues in general are really too big. They're really, really big. And at places like Delphi, instead of an altar like right in front of the Temple of Apollo, that's still there today, they have a replica of the famous charioteer group, which would have been in one of the treasuries. So it's like, okay, why are they doing that? Is this just like, kind of like a postcard collection for this game? Like, I expect to see this, where is it? That's something I'd be happy to hear discussion Another thing too, in terms of the statues, a lot of these statues would actually have been painted or have had like different sorts of precious or semi-precious stones, enamel inlaid. There really wouldn't have been these sort of like glossy white statues, but I kind of wonder, are they catering to modern expectations there?
What's strange with that is that there's both, right? You have some statues that are painted in the game that, you know, kind of reflect what we know about how they would have looked. But then you also have a few that are just white. And that combination of the two is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially it kind of, in my mind, has to do a little bit with fame, right? So if we, as a player, understand a statue to be white or to be only, like, you know, one color, then to have it painted might even distort our ability to recognize it in some weird way. And so when we finally would, the player might get frustrated is like a really strong word, but there's like a certain amount of knowledge that we always have to kind of work with.
Disoriented.
Disoriented is a good word.
Like, you know, we expect these certain things. Would you even recognize it?
Right. Yeah.
So it's something that kind of detracts from how engaged you are.
I feel like that one's painted,
Yeah, so that one is definitely painted. Maybe we should go to a Herm. There's one right here. Yeah. So, classics folks.
Me.
Yeah, let's talk about Herms. So, Herms. A Herm is called a Herm because it's derived from Hermion, or Hermes, a representation of Hermes, who is a god who protects travelers, who protects businessmen, people who are coming and going. And so it's very common throughout the Greek world to have a little, well, kind of a pillar that's maybe square or rectangular at the bottom, but has a bust of Hermes at the top. But that's not all, right?
But wait, there's more.
So, Hermes, for being male, they're anatomically correct, right? And not just that. Let's be honest. And it was full of erect penises. So what you would expect to see here, like right about, pretty much like where she's looking right now.
Right at that
level. would be an erect penis. Well, what's going on with this, right?
He seems confused.
Where did it go?
Why would there be this in the ancient world? Well, because it's a sign of good luck. It's a sign of good luck. And so we talked a little bit about why it's no mistake. I have seen no Herm with anything but a very smooth sort of front. And that's something else I'd love to talk to the developers about.
Yeah, so in our previous conversation, the previous panel about this, we were wondering, well, maybe it's because they're trying to keep the rating down or something, or they're not trying to rock the boat. But then you get to the statue of Zeus, which to the point has a line of dialogue about how obvious and you can climb on his penis. So so what's the difference exactly, right? And
what is that one, isn't it? Like,
yeah. What I was thinking.
That's
possibly,
the first synchronization point too. You're hanging on to his. Sorry.
Yeah. No. What I was thinking was, of the things that would be funny, Zeus is funny. Zeus as a concept is funny. Climbing on Zeus is funny. But I wouldn't be able to do anything with the Herm. I'm saying that right?
Yeah.
The Herm.
Yeah.
If anything, it would probably meme itself. But that would be it. There wouldn't be any actual interaction. And so as a player, I don't feel as rewarded when I I come up to Zeus and I'm like, I can climb this. This will be funny. I don't get that interaction like I would with a Herm. So there's a lot of risk that Ubisoft is doing. I say risk in like large quotes, risk in adding these kind of this anatomy, but there's also a lot of reward for the player.
Sure.
There's a lot of reward. Like, that was really funny, and it's actually, the players talk to each other about it, but I don't know if they would talk as much with the Herm since they don't actively interact with it.
Or, I kind of wonder, like, something that's a little jarring or disorienting, like that's
it's just a head and a penis. Yeah, there are at least legs and.
The other thing
you
to
expect
note,
something that it would be weird if it wasn't there.
Yes.
Yeah.
and to go off of the rating talk, something that I just thought about is that oftentimes with ratings, they're limited by like how many of them there are. And so, yes, you have Lightning Zeus with his genitals out and dangling, but then there are many, many more Herms in the world than there are of this particular statue, and so on. And so, when you're building an open world game like this, first of all, you have a very limited number of single-use assets, buildings that you can, or statues or whatever, that you can place only one of. Oftentimes, for things like a Herm, you'll have a 3D artist model exactly one of them, and then it just gets duplicated and copy-pasted, everywhere across the map. And so, with that, it's not super surprising that they all have this smooth face. But then also, if they all had genitals, then they would all have genitals, and that's a lot more.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So these single-use assets, it takes a lot of work to create these, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot.
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
There's a reason.
So a lot of these like buildings and ruins and such are actually kind of modular. They're almost like ruin Lego sets. You might have like a crumbling bridge asset that just gets stuck on top of some wall assets that someone else has built, and so on. And they've just been kind of placed down such that it looks good, but then they're reused across multiple ruins. They are probably reused within the same ruin. Because as it turns out, people aren't very good at noticing, oh, I saw that wall before.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but honestly, that's not something I would pick up on. Like for something like these ruins, unless they're particularly well known.
They do a really good job of making it all look handcrafted and such. For a somewhat less well-polished look, you can look at, for example, the dungeons in Skyrim, where they didn't do as good of a job of hiding the fact that these are all kind of modularly put together.
And one of the ways they do that too is by, some of these they might make just for one ruin. Like they might take this, but this looks almost like something that you also saw in the Parthenon.
Yeah.
So they put them carefully around.
Yeah. Yeah, some of those, like I've noticed, the Minoans have some famous frescoes, one of which you've probably seen in class with the bull leaping scene. And so you have this really distinctive looking bull with young men doing what looks like acrobatics, sort of springing, doing a handstand on the bull. And so I was in the tomb of Ajax, I think, and it's like, oh, look, 1, 2, 3, 4 bulls, right? And so it's those works of art that, like, somebody who's like taken art history or Western civilization or something might notice, but something like the architecture, that's going to me at least, I'm not a person that really notices that.
And a lot of those statues, especially the painted ones, again, the ones that you're not expected to be able to recognize instinctively, you're going to kind of gloss over. And as long as they don't put two of the same statue too close together, well, you'll probably forget about that other one and not even realize when you see it again later on.
Even in Athens itself, where I was walking around, a lot of those statues were the same statue, just placed in different parts. And they were painted exactly the same way, too.
Yep.
So how long would
tight turning radius on that boat.
Oh, I know, I was about to say.
How long would it take to create, like, some of these assets? Is that
Individual assets?
Yeah. Like what?
So you could probably get like a statue of Zeus within a few months if you had a good modeler and good reference.
Wow.
Maybe less just because it doesn't have to move. Moving parts always take more time, as it turns out, and statues don't move that often, unless you're playing.
And that's the difference too in that
various
2D and 3D art team, where the one is working on, for example, you know, Cassandra moving, or even as simple as, you know, one of these animals that you can see down maybe somewhere.
Of course, the one time where there isn't a wolf attack.
Yeah. And always those. There we go. There's an antelope. It's gonna run away from me. Hey, friend. So like that is done not by someone necessarily. Probably not done by the same person that did the statue, you know, or one of the statues of the bull that we saw in.
Yeah, but there's also kind of a place where they can start to do shortcuts, right? So, like, the grass doesn't move every time you go through it, right? The grass only moves at, like, every other step or so. And also, like, the grass doesn't really look like it's coming out of the ground, really. It looks like it was put on the ground. So, like, there are ways that people can kind of make shortcuts.
Don't hurt the doggos.
Sorry?
Don't hurt the doggos.
You can kind of do shortcuts when it comes to the artwork, and with that idea of, like, can you repeat something and a player not notice?
Sure. I've only
Even
seen
the
a
grass
few places where,
Yes.
like...
Oh, yeah, the grass is very much
That content is actually painted on, usually. You'll have like a terrain or like a map, and then you'll take a brush that just randomly places down different grass assets and just...
Good doggos, he said.
All doggos are good doggos, Laurens. Don't push me.
Yeah, I also think, I think Assassin's Creed especially, and like even with this statue, I keep coming back to like something like Final Fantasy 15, where it's like if you're climbing on something, how much more detailed it has to be, how much more accurate it has to be. So I think that also...
Because now you can see it from every angle. Regular statue that you're just walking around, well, you'll only see it from like 360 degrees. But if you can climb on it, you can't take any shortcuts. One of the really fun things in Overwatch, before they patched it out, was that you could actually slip through the world boundaries and go and look at the scenery that was very, very distant, that just kind of floated around. And cars were actually just like painted, just like billboards, essentially, that just animated around. And they were just streaks of light. But from a distance, they looked like cars. And so that saves a ton of time, because now you just have to create a streak of light that animates around. You don't have to model cars. You don't have to figure out, like, how do cars work in Overwatch. And then they added a map that had cars, and so then figured it out. But a lot of those things you can take shortcuts on, and shortcuts are really important for game development, because if we didn't take any shortcuts, then games would never come out, ever.
So there's really a lot of illusion.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so I normally just do text-based games, and even then I do shortcuts. Alec has helped me with these shortcuts. You know, ways to make it so that a condition can be met just barely enough so that a player can have, you know, such and such response. But I also think that players kind of play that way too.
They try to break
Right,
it.
right. And you know, we've talked about this, what makes a game enjoyable? Sure, the story, sure, the mechanics, that's fun, but can I crash the horse? Like that, I think that becomes really important to players, and I think that's very, very much an expectation when it comes to Assassin's Creed specifically, because it's kind of notorious for saying, yeah, you can crash the horse, and it'll be fun. You know, just like, yeah, you can climb on Zeus, and we knew you were going to do it, right? Like, they anticipate, they know their audience really well, I think.
It's especially fun. One of the skins that you have for the horse in this one is actually a Pegasus. So if you take a sprint off the edge of a mountain, you don't necessarily just fall and die. Horse. You'll actually, it'll start flying down and float down slowly, and it won't take any falling damage. That is how horses work.
Okay.
It's a purchased one.
So
I purchased.
Yeah. So there's really a lot of interplay between like creating this setting that is believable enough, but also allows players to do what they expect to be able to do.
Well, yeah, and I think
and
a lot
kind
of
of play
these,
with the
a lot of
rules.
the times, especially with the last two games being in Egypt, where is kind of the basis for where magic came from. They were the first ones that were really like, oh, there's mages.
Mm-hmm.
But then now you have Greece, which is very much into our modern culture as pretty much any kind of mythology that is, you know,
Mm-hmm.
oh, there was lightning, that was Zeus.
Mm-hmm.
He was mad.
Yeah, that reminds me of some things that I thought were just sort of nice touches in this game. You know, they're not just thinking about history, they're thinking about some intellectual and cultural trends of this period. And, you know, one of the big developments that we see in Greece and, you know, other parts of the Mediterranean too, is that there's a move away from using divine causation as an explanation for everything. And so when you go down to Epidaurus, not only do you go to the sanctuary of Asclepius, you meet Hippocrates. And so you're dealing with a real sort of culture clash between the older, more traditional way of diagnosing illness and finding some way to cure it. And if you go to the sanctuary of Asclepius, what you would do is go and talk to a priest who would examine you, and he might have a particular remedy for you. One of those remedies would be to sleep in the sanctuary or the temple part, the Asclepion, and sleep in a room full of snakes. And during that night, you would have a dream and tell it to the priest in the morning, and the priest would say, ah, yes, well, this is what this means. Whereas Hippocrates is looking at more causes that happen for reasons that aren't divine. You know, so a very different explanation of the world, and one that could really seem shocking or scandalous to a lot of people within this culture, and you also see that reflected as well. And so, you know, this is historical, but it's not chronological, yet that is very authentic.
Yeah, I think like even the player gets to participate in whether or not to kind of buy into that. There's that scene in the cave where Cassandra has to either imitate Hermes to someone who's desperate and praying, or you can choose not to. And just like we had in that video, the player's choice is always, always, always the driving factor. So you get to choose to either give this woman hope or to take it away and say nothing. But that's still in conversation with what was historically happening, and maybe that decision to give her hope won't work out super well, but depending. But
you still, the choice is important.
Exactly, the choice is important, but also choice in what context, I think, is always what Assassin's Creed is trying to answer.
And so the point that you made there, Laurens, and that you were reinforcing, Jillian, is that what the developers are doing is paying, you know, a fair bit of attention to the differences in these societies and really incorporating them into the fabric of the game, so that, you know, that sense of place is reinforced while allowing players to do what they expect to be able to do.
Yeah, expectation, I think, especially with Assassin's Creed, and we were also talking about this in the previous panel, but I'm going to say this wrong, the presence of Animus, geez, I cannot say that word.
Oh yeah, that's yeah.
The presence in Odyssey specifically when it comes to Animus is very, very sparse compared to other games. Partially, I think, because I think they were listening to the fact, I think they were listening to a lot of things, but I think they're listening to the fact that players don't really have a lot of fun when it comes to Animus. It's interesting to see.
Would you mind telling people more about Animus?
Animus is the real world. The concept of Assassin's Creed is that your ancestor was super cool in the past. You get to take in that body, do all these cool things that they can do, and then you come back to the real world and you forget that you sucked and that you can't climb buildings anymore.
Now you can.
But you could in the past. So like that's the thing. So it also kind of creates a framework that says you are a visitor here, you are a tourist. Assassin's Creed isn't to affect the war, it isn't to change the tides, it's not what you're doing. You're here to have like fun, essentially, and then like come back and realize you had fun. So that framework I think is really useful because it makes it so that the player actually has way more choice instead of saying, well, I'm going to kill Hitler. You know, like they don't have a quest necessarily that's overarching and involved with history. Instead, they get to experience the idea of history, the culture of history, and also makes it so that Assassin's Creed doesn't have to be like super correct all the time.
It sets player expectation to be, you're not going to be making huge historical choices, but any choices that you do make, you know, they might have immediate consequences for your game in the past, but ultimately things are going to happen the way that they, you know, the way that they did. You're not going to make, you know, spoiler alert, you're not going to make Athens suddenly win the Peloponnesian War. Things are going to go down in general the way that they have, but you can affect smaller things with choice.
Right, and especially with like the fact I think the letdown when it comes to the Animus is coming back and suddenly all of your hard work means nothing. And I think
plus that dialogue, right?
Yeah.
Every time. So I think Ubisoft's kind of got the message after a while that we don't really want. I mean, I personally don't really want to be in the real world. I'm not here to be in the real world. I'm here to be in Athens. That's why I bought the game. That's why I'm there. That's my expectations that's been preset. So we're actually, I think this is probably the shortest amount of time we've ever spent.
2 times. I think it's 2 or 3 times that you're actually out of the Animus.
Compared to the first game.
Where you're out of it in like every scene. Pretty much. But that's also a difference in the evolution of the game.
That's fair.
In the first game, you're actually going into the Animus in order for you to be able to learn these skills that they have. So you're learning, who's the first one? Altair was the first one. Altair's ability to climb walls and use the hidden blade and things like that. But then now you're going in there in order to actually discover something. So the whole reason that you're in the Animus in Odyssey is because you're following Herodotus' writings and trying to find the lost city of Atlantis. And spoiler alert, you find it. But you can't get it.
Right. I also think that, like, I don't know, like the open world is so interesting to me, especially when it comes to this idea of exploration, right? You know, like Breath of the Wild, I think, paints it super well. This idea of there's going to be areas, right, that you can't go into. You're going to figure that out really fast. But what did you meet? Like level 50 sharks? You had to swim away?
Yeah. So we were talking about how there was one player who swam from one side of the map to the other side of the map.
Just to see how long it took.
Just to see how long it took.
Right.
And I was, my first playthrough, I made the unfortunate mistake of placing my boat on the wrong side of Greece. And I didn't have a synchronization point on the other side.
I've done that too.
Which causes a problem is, if you want to go to the other side, you have 2 options. You either go straight through the very painful level 50 guards that want to kill you, or you sail around to the level 50 boats that want to kill you. Spoiler alert, I would advise the sailing because you can outrun them. It takes longer, but it's safer. But at one point I was doing this and there were sharks. And these sharks were, 20 levels above me, and they kind of just charge you. You can't dodge them in the water. They're sharks, you're not. I don't know about you, but I can't dodge a shark in the water. Neither can Cassandra or Alexios. And so that was, the minute you die, you are desynchronized is the wording for it. So you don't actually die. You just spawn back at your last save point. So that's, one of those things that, there's things that you shouldn't do and things that they try to tell you you shouldn't do, but they don't stop you from actually doing it.
Yep.
They teach you the hard way.
Yeah.
Anything can be done with enough skill. But so like there's a certain aspect of like gatekeeping that ends up happening. So they can guide you through story. They can say, we'll bring you here on our terms though, right? And I think that that's one of the most natural ways to do it, is instead of just putting a fence and making you you know, or like a locked door and making you get a key. Instead, it's this idea of, well, okay, fine, I decide that I want to be stronger so that I can go through here.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about is that we're kind of talking a lot about player expectation, and games can play into that or they can, you know, subvert it, but usually players are pretty satisfied when most of the time their expectations are catered to. And so that kind of helps with the entire RPG mechanic of leveling up. We expect a story to be told from small beginnings, going up to greatness, and then, you know, completing some epic quest. That's how a lot of epic stories are told, especially the ones that aren't tragedies. And so there's this expectation that, yes, of course, I will grow stronger, and I will be a more capable person at the end of this story than I was at the beginning, both in terms of my skill at the game and in terms of my character's skills. They're reinforcing each other. And then there's also this kind of expectation of, you know, in like the second act, so to speak, there's going to be this downfall. Right, you get better, things are going great, all of a sudden things are not going great, and you have to, you know, climb out of that well that you've dug, and that's a pretty classic story structure. And what I think is really interesting from a narrative perspective is that Assassin's Creed Odyssey uses that. It uses historical events and sets them into the narrative structure that you would expect. So it takes, for example, the plague, and says, okay, the plague is going to be our second act downfall, and, you know, the fall of Athens and so on, and the death of Pericles. And that's going to fit into how you expect a story to be told. Yeah. And so that kind of helps with the non-chronology, the fact that you can take something that really happened and then just kind of say, I'm going to make it fit our preconceived notion of how stories are told.
Yeah, I like that. And something else that I think I'd like to talk about, and by the way, y'all should, you know, ask questions and so forth. You know, how can you change history? And so the simulation, while you're not actually going to, another sort of plot direction that you can go in is by having just like an everyday sort of person go on this, you know, sort of hero's journey, but involve elements that are really have a lot more to do with like movies or books, such as in this case a conspiracy theory, as well as a mythical place. So it allows you to be engaged in the story without having to have this prior knowledge or be tied to, well, I know what's going to come next, too. And I think that's pretty important.
Yeah, you're not playing to win the Peloponnesian War. Right. You're playing in a backdrop of...
Yeah. And so, you know, like, oh, I know what's going to happen at this battle. Well, that might not be affect that particular plot that has to do with Alexios or Cassandra very much at all.
It definitely frees them up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really think it gives them a place or like the space to say we're going to focus on the character, right? So that's why especially like the dialogue choices or like romantic options, like things like that, I think they become so important, right? Because although yes, I am motivated by stealing and killing, why am I stealing? Why am I killing? That's the more complicated question. And while sometimes it's for kicks, other times,
let's be honest.
Other times it can be for other people, right? So you know, one of your first missions is that you have to rescue this little girl, and you rescue her, and she's actually really funny because she's like, you know, last time I was kidnapped, you know, they gagged me. That was terrible. And Cassandra's like, Phoebe, don't say that. But
please stop getting kidnapped.
I know, stop getting kidnapped. She's like, it'll be fine. But it puts you in this place of actually enjoying interacting with other characters, and it's not so much the setting. It's much more about the people at that point when it comes to that narrative perspective.
Yeah.
Do y'all have any questions? Feel free to ask questions. Yeah.
You mentioned visual illusions as a way to kind of shortcut in making the game. In what ways, specifically in Odyssey, have you noticed audio illusions?
Audio illusions?
Yeah, any sort of sounds.
Oh, we were actually talking about this earlier. This isn't an audio illusion necessarily. It's more of a choice. So Cassandra's voice is really, really low. But there are, and so a lot of the dialogue is the same between the two. The choices are the same between the two. So I think Assassin's Creed was trying to be very, very diplomatic about like not hindering one over the other. But Cassandra's voice being so low, at times, whichever character you choose has to imitate a male voice. And so in choosing a lower voiced voice actor, kind of makes it so that they don't have to change the plot. And so it kind of shaves some time off their own schedules. But I'm sure there's other stuff that you guys have noticed.
One of the things that's kind of jumped out at me has been while I'm infiltrating enemy encampments and things, I'm not very good at hiding bodies, as it turns out. I kind of just leave them out for people to find and say, yeah, they'll find their friend eventually, it'll be fine. Sure enough, they do. And even though they haven't seen me, they will still, for example, shout out, "I'll find her."
Uh-huh.
All right. I mean, I'm glad that you're respecting the fact that I chose the better protagonist, but
you know,
at the same time, at the same time, like, how is stab wound? Is that like particularly feminine?
Right.
And other times they'll say, "I'll find them." And so they'll use both. So they're able to reuse a lot of the dialogue that uses non-gendered pronouns, for example, things like that. Oftentimes the AI, especially for stealth games, is kind of funny in that it wants to let you know what the enemies are thinking at all times, because that's how you play it, right? You're like, oh, that enemy is looking for me. I should, stay low.
Exclamation point.
Yeah. And so they'll always announce like whatever they're doing. Like constantly, they will have little barks of, I've decided to do this, so let me communicate to the player that I'm looking for you, or
I'm gonna go light the brazier.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, like one of my favorite examples is in the Batman games when Jason says protect the medics, and you're like, oh, sorry, I should target the medics, you say, right? So like there's this idea of like how you tell the character to do, the player to do stuff.
And along with that, reusing the general voice lines is that if you look through, every single archer looks just like every single archer that's not it. Even between the Spartan and the Athenian archers, the only difference is that one is wearing red and the other is wearing blue. And that works for every other, general soldier, unless you get into like the nation leaders or the generals that you see. Even the captains, when you're doing conquest battles, are the same as another kind of soldier. You can just regular soldier. He's just a slightly higher level or in the league. So.
And so just talking about shortcuts, that degree of uniformity, like the fact that Athenians or Spartans might be wearing different colors at all is certainly a modern convention. They might have had some emblems on their shields, sure, but it would not have been that apparent. I mean, we're looking for different things, like, is that a good guy or a bad guy? Is this a guy I want to kill or want to let live?
Is this a guy in blue or a guy in red?
Yeah, yeah.
I also think, and I think a lot of games have actually started doing this, where they do like that summary dialogue tag, right? Where you have your choices of saying yes or no, and you click yes, and she says, I don't know, I guess I'll do it for you. It like it adds character, but it's like this shortcut way so that because the player doesn't like to read loads. Right. So it's how do I get the player to pick the one that I know they'll be okay with? Yeah. And so like in a way that's a shortcut for the player, but it also makes it so that you're not sitting there typing out everything every time.
It's entertaining too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is the sort of thing that YouTube videos are made of. Like, gee, Commander Shepard is such a Yeah.
Yeah. I guess specifically for audio, the only really shortcuts that they have is where if you're out in the country, reusing different sounds for the animals, or even just the quiet background sounds might be the same, but that is generally just done by a composer who is told, we need a sound for the forest, or a sound for this bustling city, Athens, or for Laconia. And every continent has, or country, I guess, has these slightly different sounds. but the very base background sounds are always the same.
Yeah.
And that's just because it doesn't make sense to give the wolf on this side of the country a different sound as the one from the other side.
So I think that they've actually done a little better job with this game than like in Assassin's Creed Origins, like the sounds in the city, because, you know, one thing that was nice about Origins is that you'd hear Greek in places where you'd expect to hear Greek, like Alexandria. On the other hand, you would hear the same man saying the same Greek sentence over and over, ita, okay, here we go again, right? But that's not something I've noticed.
I think they
it's
layered
probably
it.
happening.
I think they layered it a lot more, and so you can't pick out individual phrases that well.
Okay, that's good.
So then you don't notice the repetition of those individual phrases. They've definitely improved it over the years. I still remember, you know, early Assassin's Creed games, people always commenting, "What is he doing?" When I was climbing a building.
Skyrim guard.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm climbing a building, mind your own business.
Obviously.
What does it look like I'm doing? So yeah, audio, usually all of the illusions and things with that are just related to reusing assets as much as possible to try and lower how much content you actually have to produce and then download later.
Oh.
Rest in peace, my disk drive.
So what other sorts of things?
Any other questions that y'all have about either the game itself, the history, how they tie together? We want to hear input from you guys. So
Yes.
Like,
Oh, sorry.
so like as far as history goes, like in the game, there's the cult that kind of like
There's the what? The cult? Yeah.
kind of tries to like rig the war in a way,
Right.
like both sides or whatever. Is that historically
I
accurate?
no. It's something that Ubisoft put in as a plot element. I mean, something that it kind of seems similar to is there's public religion, which is what you would see practiced in like the temples like Sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi and so forth. But there's another sort of category of religious practice called mystery, where you would need to be initiated, where the rites were secret, and even the various members could be secret. I think that they're definitely pumping up the volume with the Cult of Cosmos in that aspect, but it has a familiar enough feel to it. So, you know, again, I think that this is a really good sort of plot device, but it's also kind of attuned to some parts, at least, of Greek culture that I see.
Yeah,
The benefit, oh, sorry.
No, I'm pretty sure we're going to say the same thing, so you go.
The benefit of keeping it as like this cult that's secretive and, you know, they all wear masks and so on, and they all get killed in various gruesome ways.
And drop awesome loot. Yeah.
Yes. Benefit of that is that because they're, you know, very secretive and such, well, of course we don't know about them now. Of course history doesn't include them because they were so secret that they were never chronicled and documented. And so why would we know about the totally real Cult of Cosmos?
Yeah, it kind of plays the same role that like Hydra plays, right? Hydra existed during World War II. You just didn't know about it. It was so secret. Yeah.
And kind of along with that too is, you know, it's not necessarily that everybody in the cult has the same idea either. And you especially notice this when you first get introduced to the cult. There's a scene where somebody who's in the cult, who's wearing the mask and the robes, is told, you need to go kill somebody. And he says, well, I don't want to do it. Well, the guy who's telling him to do it doesn't take a no for an answer, and his solution is by physically harming him and permanently scarring him. Because if you don't do what he says, you kind of gave up your freedom when you joined the cult. And he's one of the leaders of the cult, so...
And they all don't know. It's all like a bunch of Cult of Cosmos cells. Player character, and you have this mask and a robe you put on. They're like, "Oh, hi, are you new here? Here's what you do." So
here's our pamphlet.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and even when you're hunting them down, they're all set up in different, you know, specializations within the cult. One is, you know, all of them are sailors, or all of them are basically mercenaries, or all of them own mines, or all of them are political figures, things like that. So it's not historically accurate,
Right.
but they're using historical figures to say, well, it could have happened.
It could have happened. And, you know, the names that they pick some mythologically themed names, but they pick actually a lot of names that, if you read Greek, they're familiar. You know, it's stuff that you will have seen. There's actually kind of a branch of Latin and Greek studies called onomastics. That's the study of people's names. You have big indexes, and, you know, so that kind of adds to the depth of that aspect of the game.
You also had a question.
Yeah, so background dialogue in the game, they try to emulate ancient Greek. I just wonder about the pseudo-accuracy of that. What you go.
Well, they're definitely using modern Greek pronunciation, right? And so this is something that I've learned as well between Latin and its development and into Italian. The ancient accent often stays on the modern version of the word. And so when you see brasidas, it's accented on the I, you know, but at the same time, let's go to thelos. But that's how modern Greeks pronounce the delta, whereas the Greeks in this period pretty surely said duh for D. So I don't know. I can't think of, except for like the dialogues, I can't think of making out much pronunciation in general. I mean, what do you think?
I mean, you can't hear a lot.
Right.
That in combination with my overall ignorance of the language doesn't
Oh.
help.
Well, and a lot of the background is also, the background that they let you hear most of the time is also in our case, in English.
Oh, that's true.
Too.
Yeah.
And sometimes what they'll do is, what they did, less so in Odyssey, I felt like, is they will have the dialogue in, you know, ancient Greek. But then the text that you see on screen for the subtitles is just English.
Right.
Or they'll kind of do a mixture of the two. So they'll throw, you know, a Greek word in there.
Yeah.
The one that stands out is malakas.
Sure.
You know,
You hear it a lot.
you hear that pretty much in every sentence. You know, all right, we'll throw that in there, and if you don't know what it means, you can use your imagination,
Right.
kind of thing. You know.
I think that's important to the extent that it's kind of training you, right? Like Malakas is almost in like the first line of dialogue, I think.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of this idea of like, you should know this word, you're going to hear it, right? And you do. You can hear it on the street. You can hear it when other people are talking to you. So it's kind of this idea of like, this is how I'm going to train you as a developer to a player of what you should be expecting, but also like, don't be confused because I gave this to you day one. It's like the teacher being mad that, you know, you didn't read the syllabus. Like, I gave it to you. You should have known.
One of the interesting parts on it is that it is a fine balance between making, again, this line between, you know, authenticity and accuracy. So you want to feel like you're in ancient Greece. And so part of the way that they do that is they throw Greek words at you. You also want to know what's going on. And presumably not every player is, you know, wants to the entire game, and so they will translate a lot of it. They'll leave some flavor in there, a few select words that, again, you get kind of trained on, but they're not important, right? Like, it's not crucial to know exactly what the translation for Mistyus is. Right. You pick it up because you're like, oh, I'm going around and doing mercenary things. Sure, you know.
Can I add on to that a little bit? Because I've been thinking about this Mistyus word, which is not what, like, Thucydides would use. He doesn't use it. He uses mistophoros, usually in the plural, mistophoroi, or mistotos. And I'm just thinking, okay, so somebody with a passing knowledge of Greek would get that stem, mist, being for pay, right? But in terms of how easily it's said, Mistyus, is a lot easier on the tongue and perhaps to the ears than either of those other two words. So I'm just kind of speculating.
Yeah.
It's also because
flavor,
they have all these
so-
different voice actors doing these different
That's
characters
true,
that,
yeah.
you know, training them to say the correct word
Sure.
that might
And
not
in
necessarily
and in a
have.
way that will automatically
Well, yeah, and
trigger for you.
oftentimes they'll
Yeah.
have to say the whole sentence where they're saying this whole sentence in English
Yeah.
and then switch to Greek and right back into English.
Mhm.
Just
One of
for
the-
one word is also a lot harder when you're
Sure.
doing correct pronunciation.
Sure.
And they do make that a little bit easier by, somewhat strangely, I think, all of the translations, you know, go through English, but then they're all said in like this kind of Greek accent.
Yeah.
And that, number one, helps sell the immersion as well. Like, oh, I'm in Greece, they're all speaking with an accent. Now I can parse that this isn't just regular English, this is actually Greek. But then you can also switch between accented English into Greek, presumably a little more easily than you could switch between a traditional English accent, whatever that may be, into...
And the part of that too is what we were talking about earlier, is that feel of the animus, where you are essentially living, it's actually pretty much like how I was playing the game. So you're getting a live stream back from what it saw, and you're sending inputs back to the animus, and the animus is sending you a translated version of what it knows.
Maybe it just censors out Malak.
I guess. Or it's sending it to Google Translate API, and it's like, well, what is this?
The blood's fine. The blood's fine. The cursor.
Right.
Maybe that's where all the penises went.
The animus is just controlling what you say.
I think Alcibiades just got to him a little soon.
Yeah. That could be.
Are there any other questions?
I thought there was something over here.
Oh, Kenneth.
So I haven't actually played the game myself, but I've seen clips of it. And
Yeah.
I'm interested in the way that it blends historical and mythological elements of things.
Oh, that's a good, yeah.
Medusa shows up.
You know,
Yes,
we were
right.
literally just talking
Yeah,
about
so
Medusa.
so one of the story arcs is actually, so one of the main story arcs is actually this mythological idea of Atlantis. And in order to get to Atlantis, you have to slay these mythological beings. You know, you have to slay the Cyclops or the Minotaur or Medusa and the Sphinx. Thank you, whoever said that. And you know, these with the Sphinx, it's you have to answer the riddles correctly, and then there's a little bit of an interaction, and the Sphinx disappears, and you get the artifact. And the same thing with the Minotaur. You have to actually slay the Minotaur. You know, you have to go through his labyrinth and find the Minotaur and slay the Minotaur. And for the Cyclops, you have to actually go through this whole story arc of, oh, I'm a god. I'm gonna go meet my godly brothers. Oh wait, it's just the Cyclops that is gonna go kill me now. Let me go fix that. And then you get to Medusa, and it is, we were talking about this, is that the typical Medusa story is that she's defeated basically by looking at herself in the reflection. And that does not play at all a part in this, in this version of it, because what I mentioned was that I was very sad that I was never able to play with a shield in the game.
Okay.
Everybody else has a shield except for you. And you know, so you don't have that ability to, you know, reflect anything that she does. So you're stuck with either fighting her hand-to-hand combat, which, in case you don't know, you don't want to do that because if she looks at you, you're kind of frozen. Or not look at her and just shoot blankly at her with arrows, which is kind of what I took as the approach. But then there's other aspects where she actually lets you do hand-to-hand combat with petrified mercenaries that she brings to life. So there is this mythological aspect, but not all of the mythological stories are able to be applied to the game mechanics.
Yeah, so I actually have very strong opinions about the Medusa fight. Okay, so the elephant in the room about Cassandra, right? I'm not a fan of her name. That's fine. What? So she's kind of the first like legitimate female player that we get in an Assassin's Creed game. Assassin's Creed. People have been begging Assassin's Creed for a long time. They never really let us. So finally, we get this female player, and I adore her. I think they did a great job with her. I think her armor looks lovely. I think her dialogue is great. But when it comes to Medusa, I wanted the Medusa creature character. I wanted her to be treated like the sexual assault survivor that she's kind of discussed as in Greek, like legends.
That's true. Yeah.
And that's not really what we got. And we got like a love story actually, which I thought either was really tone deaf or really on the mark. I wasn't exactly sure if they were trying to be like, no, see, Medusa's fine. It's just like this person who's possessed. I couldn't really tell what they were trying to do.
Wow.
And so I guess I would like to know your opinion. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Kenneth.
Kenneth, I'd like to know your opinion, and also your opinion on how Medusa ends up getting represented or not represented.
I haven't played the game.
Yeah.
Well, like,
I guess to me the way that she was really represented was like the way that Enchantress was represented in Suicide Squad without the sexualization. Was kind of how she looked stylistically.
You didn't start that off very well.
No.
Because it's my understanding, because I haven't fought Medusa, is that Medusa's kind of this like demon possessing thing, right?
Yeah.
Medusa's state of mind.
all of these mythological monsters are just it pretty much looks just like the Apple of Eden that you have in all of the earlier games. That has overflowed the person who is holding it with power and transformed them into this monster. And the story for Medusa goes that a group of people went in to try and slay Medusa, failed, well, succeeded, actually, and the one person picked up the orb that was left by the slain Medusa, and she now became Medusa.
Okay.
Is kind of how...
So they're dodging.
Yes.
Which is kind of I don't know if they were trying to be, because Medusa is a creature that you would expect to be fighting in this game, right? It's like this very classic monster. But I find it very interesting that while this game was being so upfront about women, and then it brings in Medusa and makes her a monster, I think it was a hard thing for them to do.
Yeah, there's room for, compared to other game series, like I'm thinking, like in particular about The Witcher 3, where you have a lot of nice psychological nuance in many of the quests and the characters. You know, that's something that is not one of the series' strong points.
Yeah.
I see them moving towards that in some aspects. This figure, Chrysis, who is a Greek woman who has a pretty complicated behavior. That's kind of as much depth as I've seen. It seems like a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I think it is. I also think that Assassin's Creed players may not come for complexity. I mean that in like the nicest way possible. Right. They're not necessarily here for general story. They're here to climb buildings and have fun, which is fine.
This is Ubisoft. I play Far Cry, not for the story. But I just like, can I make mayhem?
Yeah.
Yes, so.
But I did want to address the Medusa concept. Yeah. Just because it bothered me, but I expect a lot.
Well, they've also taken steps in that way. Why can't they?
Yeah. Why not go all the way in?
Well, and in that aspect, it's not just Medusa that is not, having a really developed story. It's, I felt that Daphne and the Sisters of Artemis were not developed as well as they could have been. You find one, she tells you to go slay all the mythical beasts. You try flirting with her pretty much throughout, or you have the opportunity to, I guess.
It's not an opportunity. It's the only choice.
If you have the flirt option, you use it. Come on now. And then you get through the story, and you have to make one of three decisions. You say, I'm going to kill you. I'm not going to kill you, or I'm going to walk away. And if you choose one of the latter two, you're going to get hunted down by the Sisters of Artemis and never get any more of a story from it. And I felt like that was
a weird punishment.
A weird punishment. And the other thing of it was that you had the same. This is the only thing I didn't like about favoring one, not favoring one over the other, is that the bonus of slaying her is that you became the leader of the Sisters of Artemis, but you had that same option as Alexios. Which seems very strange, how a man is the leader of the Sisters of Artemis to me.
Right. When you get to these camps, it's like, oh, there's a lot of women hanging out.
Yeah,
here. It's pretty notable.
But then later on in the story, you go back to this place, and I chose not to slay her.
True love.
And when I went back there for another quest, I had to fight almost all of the Sisters of Artemis again. Anyway.
Okay. Yeah, I do have to say that I think actually that it's in a way fair that Alexios gets to be the leader of the Sisterhood of Artemis, just because if Cassandra gets to be a mercenary, then Alexios can be the queen of the Sisterhood of Artemis. Yeah. I think it's fair.
What's stopping you?
I worry about his motives, possibly, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jeremy.
So I also haven't played the game, but I think Deb told me that there's this thing about like a love triangle between like Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes, and that.
I haven't gotten that far yet.
That was great. That was
really.
That's the basis for my question about how they engage with ancient Greek sexuality.
Well, I think that I think that actually
all of it.
That really, I think, meshes well with this notion that the player should be able to do what the player likes, and you know, the modern sort of more liberal attitudes towards sexuality that we've seen in the past 15 or 20 years. You know, Cassandra has that little flirt symbol with men and women, and you know, same-sex relationships, bisexuality.
Medusa's story is a same-sex relationship.
Yeah.
So
that's something I thought, okay, this works well for the player, and this is something that I think is pretty.
It works well for the time period too.
Yeah, exactly. Also,
my favorite scene when I was going through Athens was at Pericles' Symposium.
Oh yeah.
Where from that point on, throughout the rest of the story, whenever you encounter Alcibiades, he's trying to flirt with you. From every point on.
He's game. He's game. Yeah.
I think
and everybody who he sends you to knows him because they flirted with him.
I also think that's really interesting because it allows like player-to-player conversation to not be like barred by which character you chose, right? Like the people who played Alexios just as much as the people who played Cassandra get to be like, man, that guy was a jerk. He didn't accept. I flirted with him and he didn't do anything. You know, you get to have that kind of conversation, which I think is so integral to like player experience.
Right. And it's really, I mean, I do think that gamer attitudes have changed as well over the past few years, because that's been something you've seen a lot of sharp reactions to in the past. But you know, there's this one sort of scenario on the Silver Islands, and so that's Delos and Mykonos, where a Spartan commander and a woman in the community have a relationship, and you have the possibility to kind of not really start a love triangle, but initiate a romance, but only with the partner of the same sex as you. And
it's cool.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's not just the players' attitude that have changed over the last few years, it's also the developers. And over the last couple of years, you kind of went from it being kind of hinted at to it's kind of in the background to you can choose to take part in the same-sex relationship in the game. to now it's actually one of the key elements of one of the stories that you have to go through to complete the game story is a same-sex relationship, and you have to, and you're actually helping out with, you know, with this relationship.
I think it's also really telling, and this has to do with kind of like game history, so I'm sorry, but like male players choosing to play as women in games, right?
Because?
Well, okay, so there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the reasons being that like people, like it's like in MMOs, like people could theoretically treat you nicer, right, if you are a woman in a game.
Or there's why in Warcraft do so many guys choose to play female night elves, right?
So.
Or why is Lara Croft so popular?
Why is Moonguard popular?
Why is what?
Lara Croft, I would argue, is a different conversation currently.
Yeah.
However, but
previous generation I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I got you. So, so you have this thing where I think male players have gotten more and more comfortable to the point that they prefer playing the female players. You know, like Game Grumps, right? They'll always pick the female character if they can. Regardless of what game they're playing. And it's turned into such a normal thing to do when you don't have that option. It's kind of bizarre and you're really confused. Also Assassin's Creed, people have been asking forever.
Right.
Forever.
I really appreciate the fact that it's so open, because even when you have you know, things that are open to you know, gay and lesbian relationships, sometimes those are gated to, you know, certain companions and such. And so the number of people I know who have played as a man in Dragon Age only to romance Morrigan is massive.
Right.
Yeah. So there's like these huge numbers, and that affects which character you choose to play as, and then, you know, that affects a lot. And so if you're given this kind of pretty openly bisexual dynamic through the whole game, well then, there's no reason to choose a gender other than what you want to play as. It's not like you're getting, you know, punished, so to speak, for choosing a specific gender.
Yeah, everything comes down to player choice and making sure they have as many choices as they want or need or should have or can.
Yeah. One thing that I also really appreciate that you kind of brought up with dealing with historical figures is that you know, walking around Athens and talking to people and meeting Socrates and just being like, man, that guy's a dick.
Something classicists of. When you compare yourself to a horsefly stinging people, you know you're hard to get. Yeah.
I just read the apology in one of my classes, and all my students wanted to convict him.
Right.
But it's interesting because he does become one of your strongest allies.
Yeah, yeah.
It's you know, if you look at the game throughout, there are very few people that you as a character have throughout the rest of the game, that stay throughout the rest of the game. And I think the only ones really are are Alcibiades, Socrates, Herodotus, Barnabas, and that kind of centralizes it. There's not, no one else really stays with you throughout the rest of the game from fairly close to your first time meeting them through the end. And I think that
he's always really fun to talk to. Like, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely enjoyable to talk to him, but you come away from every conversation with him just going like, God, you're obnoxious. Come on.
Yeah, but then he becomes the good kind of obnoxious when.
Is there a good kind?
Yes.
Yes.
when you're messing with Cleon.
There are always more obnoxious people in the world.
So, any other questions?
Yeah.
Are there differences in whether you choose the male character, female character, the side missions?
Nope. Nothing.
Everything is the same, and they were very sure to make it that way because they didn't want somebody to say, well, I chose Alexios and I missed out on this one bit of story, so now as a completionist, which a lot of Assassin's Creed gamers also are, need to play through the whole game again.
Right.
The Persona 5 problem.
Oh my god. Jeez. It's bad. It's my sister net. It's terrible.
That's what I hate about JRPGs.
Oh yeah. The only difference that I would say is in the quality of voice acting. Personally, I prefer the voice actress for Cassandra. But that's just me. She's significantly sassier constantly. But that's the only difference I'm aware of.
Yeah, they were trying to get away from, I think, the Assassin's Creed Syndicate problem, where you had Jacob and Evie, but you could only play as one or the other for specific missions. It would kind of force you into, okay, now you have to play as Jacob, or now you have to play as Evie, and would let you freely choose for the side missions. And people weren't super jazzed about that. Just because it was like, okay, well, I have 2 different skill trees to manage now, and they've got different styles and so on, and I just happen to enjoy playing, Evie, and now you're making me play as Jacob. This is boring. Why are you making me do this? And so they were like, okay, from that response, we'll just go ahead and open it up, kind of. And
along with that, what I found really interesting is that although they had you restricted to one or the other in Syndicate, you can actually choose to have Evie as one of your lieutenants on the ship, but you don't have the option of choosing Jacob.
Well, they knew who the better character was.
Yes, but then you get the option of having Bile, which I found really interesting, but then not Aya.
Right.
Which I would have liked.
Well, she was the one who ended up on the trireme.
Right.
Yeah. She was the one that was actually going around sailing, and he's the one that gets to be one of the fighters on your ship. I found that interesting.
So, anything else? I know it's getting late, but thanks for coming. Well, one last thing that I will say is, how many other people thought this was a ridiculous mechanic? Hey, I want to upgrade my ship. Here's a bunch of branches and pebbles I picked up.
I'd like to make people better at shooting bows and arrows.
Yeah.
Have some branches.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah. Thank you. We enjoyed doing this. And if you're one of Professor Trusty's students, I have a list here. If you're one of my students,